Three, two, one, boom. Scott Tousley. Tousley. I'm going to mess this up a couple of times. Scott Tousley. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to be a guest as one of the. Am I one of the first guests? Is this how this works?
Yes, that's how it works.
Nice, cool. Very happy.
Yeah, I'm more than happy. For anybody who doesn't know, who is Scott Tousley?
I'm a normal person, I guess. So I like to start off with like what I enjoy actually doing. I don't like starting a career. So I live in Encinitas, California. It's like basically just a suburb of San Diego. So I basically live in San Diego. Yeah. If I'm not usually on the computer, I'm doing something outside, usually hiking or not hiking, surfing. I used to hike a lot. I don't hike as much anymore. And when I'm not doing that, I actually am on the computer and I work for Hubspot full time. So I work for Hubspot full time. And our team's job is basically to acquire as many users as possible to HubSpot software.
Sounds like a nice job.
Yeah.
You also blog a lot, and you're very out there. And I've stalked some of your content. Pretty good, by the way. Okay. I can recommend this at this point to anybody and everybody. And so, one thing that you seem to be pretty passionate about at the moment is career growth and how to rapidly grow a career. Just to dive right into that, what do people need to know to grow their career, especially in a fast way?
Yeah. I mean, if you want like the ultimate shortcut, usually like I don't like giving ultimate shortcuts, but it honestly is pretty simple. If you're working, I mean, it depends what you want to do for your career. If you want to work inside of a larger org or a startup or anything like that, that's one path. If you want to start your own thing, that's another path. So if you are inside of another org, basically figure out what is one of the biggest problems that no one has really solved yet, but someone needs to figure out, and go and work on it and make it work. Find one of the biggest problems of the company and go and figure out a way to get it to work. Like that's if you can summarize it, boil it down all the way to the root, like that's really it. Like where's the trajectory? One thing that the founder of HubSpot likes saying all the time is like skate where the puck is going. I think it's like a Gretzky quote or something like that. But it's very true. Like what's the direction things are heading, and then how can you kind of like make sure you're there?
I have questions, Scott.
All right, cool.
Okay, let's imagine a young marketer, maybe first job after college, and I work for HubSpot. So first, how do I identify these big problems? Like what is an approach or a framework that I could use to hopefully find some of these problems that nobody is seeing? How can I understand where the puck is going?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is it's also, I've found that it's also somewhat of like like an art form in a way. Like can I be like, Kevin, you need to be a great painter? Like you can keep working. Well, maybe you are a great painter, but you can like keep working on it. Or for me, like I've always wanted to be a musician, but I'm a horrible musician. And it's just like I have a really hard time getting to that place. And it's the same thing with like innovation or working on a really tough problem. It can be hard to recognize in an equal sense that it can be hard to basically figure out, how do I paint this beautiful thing on a blank canvas? So it's like, how do you actually do it? Just like honestly spending time figuring out like, okay, what are some possibilities? So you have to be able to come up with, possible, speaking in terms of like user acquisition, what's a possible new thing that we can actually try? And so then it's actually going out there and trying it. There's not a straightforward answer to it, to be honest. You kind of just got to have the conversations, work with the other people at the company, and figure it out Just start working on, like, someone says that's a tough problem, jump on it, start working on it.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like, adopt a test, measure, learn mindset, but first of all, understand how the company works, right? I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, especially a lot of people that are new to the job. They don't make the effort to really understand how the company works in lots of facets, right? And then the second question I have for you about that is, I'm a young marketer at HubSpot, fresh out of college. How should I balance the asks from my boss with finding a problem that nobody's working on?
Well, hopefully, your boss isn't giving you orders either. And that's definitely a balance to strike, of course, is like with someone straight out of school. It's like, here's the problem. How do you think we should solve it? And like, I think that's also somewhat on the manager as well, is to say, here's the issue that we actually have right now. What do you think we should do? And so it gives people a little bit of freedom to actually be able to come up with different varying solutions. So how do you balance what your manager is telling you to do versus you figuring out what you should do? Step one is having actual open. The number one rule on our team is honesty, and this is what I tell every single person on our team is like, I have to know how you're feeling. If you're annoyed with me, tell me. If you think I'm doing something wrong, tell me. If you're super pumped, tell me. I can't read your mind. I'm in San Diego. You're halfway across the country or the world. I don't know what's happening, and I don't know what's going on if we don't have an open communication. And so ideally, when you're trying to balance can I innovate in some way, shape, or form versus what is my manager telling me to do, hopefully that's not necessarily the dynamic that anyone has where the manager is like a one-way, here's what you need to do. It's more fluid and has a little more like autonomy, I guess. That's like my personal philosophy.
I totally agree with that. I love that kind of way of being managed as well, and saying, hey, look, here's what success looks like. Bring me ideas, show me how to get there. And honestly, me using that myself with my team yields pretty good results most of the time from a couple of perspectives. For one, again, it provides that autonomy and flexibility. But on the other hand, it also shows me how people think about problems. Mm-hmm. And I think we live in this world and we work in this industry or in this field where problem solving is one of the most important skills. And there's not always this straight line to something, right? There's not this surgery procedure or this handbook about law. Okay, handbook might be a bit underestimating, but you get what I'm saying. There's not this rule book or this straight guideline on how to do something. It is much more a creative problem-solving approach that most of us have to master. And so I'm, in a way, also curious about how people think about solving an approach. And sometimes you find these really smart ideas that you even haven't thought about, and then you understand, that person is progressing really fast and is very capable. And then other times it's something that you can teach to people, and you can see, okay, they might not think of it the right way, they get lost in details, they don't keep the goal in mind or stuff like that, and you can guide them much better. But I feel like it's something that you can teach them. It's something valuable for the rest of their lives. So I'm a huge fan. Mm-hmm. And then along that line, I'm also curious, how do you build trust with somebody who reports to you, mm-hmm. to share their honest feelings? Because I think it goes both ways, right? Like, I'm really trying to be very honest with my boss, and then there's a certain comfort zone, and there's a certain zone outside of that comfort. And I'm curious about how can I facilitate the same for people reporting to me. So what have you learned as a manager to create trust with your team?
Yeah, I mean, I always feel weird giving like advice because I'm trying to figure all this stuff out too. What has worked for me, I believe, is just setting expectations up front. Like, look, you have to be honest. You have to be honest. Like, You can tell me I am the worst manager you've ever had in your entire life. That's okay. I want to know those things, but you just have to tell me. And then why? Because what I'll do is I'll take in that information, I'll absorb it, I'll think about it and be like, okay, yeah, definitely. And then I'll improve and we'll work together on improving that. And so how do you actually build that trust with the people on your team? It's the same thing with your, my girlfriend or my family or anyone. You have to be just open and completely honest and upfront and setting the right expectations that no matter what, we'll be honest with each other. And I think with that, that really does lay the foundation for like trust, and having an open dialogue. So just equally, I'll try to prompt, what's something that I can do to help out? Is there anything more that I can be doing? That is one, that's like one small thing. And then at least on our small team, like I have just a couple of people basically on my team. It's a really small team. But every month we basically do these like monthly career catch-ups, and I ask 3 questions. So one, what's your ENPS? Essentially just how happy are you right now? Nothing to do with your projects, just like you relative to what you're working on at HubSpot, like how satisfied. Sometimes it's a 9 or a 10, sometimes it's a 5 or a 6. And so then I'm like, okay, cool. That's good to know. At least I have a pulse for how you're doing. And then second question, what do you want to work on more? Third question is, what do you want to work on less? That's it. There's really 3 questions, and that helps keep a healthy pulse on what's going on. And so I can know, like, okay, cool, as projects are coming up, that's actually a really good fit for this person. Because there's this like Venn diagram that Kevin Lee from Buffer showed me a long time ago, where it's like 3 parts. 1, what are you good at? 2, what do you want to be at? And then 3, what does the business need? And so you got to like figure out a balance to sit right. Oh God, almost lost my mic. Sit right in the middle of all of that, and that's really, really difficult. And I think that's where being a good manager comes into play. Like if you have someone who's really good at something, this reminds me of like content writers. Happens all the time. Happened to me. Happened to like basically everyone I know who is like a blogger, content writer at some point. They're good at it, and the business needs it. After a certain point in time, they don't want to keep doing it. They want to start doing something else because they're like, I just feel like I'm a journalist, or I'm not actually providing. I don't really see like the value of what I'm doing. Like, yeah, sure, I get more traffic, but like, so what? What does that actually contribute to? And so it's missing that component. The like, what do I want more exposure doing, and what do I want to get better at? And so by having these catch-ups, that helps me at least understand, okay, what more can I be giving this person? Because you want to help basically everyone just be really satisfied with what they're working on. And of course, there's that too. It's like, what do you want to get better at? Business doesn't need it. That's really hard to balance as well. And so there's this constant like pushing and pulling and trying to get things to line up.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that tension between a person wanting to really improve in or do more of something that the business doesn't have the need in. It's hard.
It's really hard. I mean, it's the same for me too. I have 100 different things that I want to get better at, but it's not really applicable to my job right now. And so like, how do you kind of balance the two? And I'll never forget this thing that, so Brian Belfour was the VP of growth at HubSpot, like HubSpot's first VP of growth when it was a product called Sidekick. And he told me this thing where you always want to keep one foot in the known and one foot in the unknown, to where like you stick with what you're good at and then you work on something else. And then as you get better, okay, cool, there's a new known that you can put your foot in, and then you can go and work on the next thing that's semi related to that or like adjacent. And I found that to be super helpful too.
Yeah, Brian is just a smart person. Very smart person. And I totally agree with that. So how do you get that right for your career at the moment? How do you create those unknown opportunities for you?
Yeah. I mean, one is just trying to figure out like what is the next thing that I feel like I'm missing that I want to get better at. Um, and then two, trying to figure out a way to apply that to whatever project or like whatever position I'm in at the time. So like one example, personal example, I guess it was a few years ago, was I was just like writing all the time. I was just churning out articles all the time. I'm like, I felt that. I felt the like, what what am I doing? Like, what's the point of this? Like, why is this actually providing any value? And then would bring that up consistently in with like my manager at the time, and then eventually that got moved over to doing more copywriting. So to Jason, like I was doing more sales copywriting versus strictly just content writing, and so I kind of moved over to that, and that was like one foot in the known and then one foot in the unknown, and got better and better at copywriting, which still never became great at it by any capacity. And then I was working on that. I'm like, okay, what's next? And then I got more into the like marketing automations, technical side of that. And then I moved over to that. And then I was doing copywriting in this. And then I'm like, okay, well, what's next after that? And kept following that chain. And I guess that's a personal anecdote or example of it.
Yeah, I want to hear all the personal stuff if you're open for it. So what is something that is what unknown is your foot in right now? What is something that you're building currently in terms of skill set?
Yeah. So we always kind of divide things into soft skills and technical skills, at least on our team at HubSpot, because they're equally as important and they hold an equal amount of weight. One of the things that I just started doing was enrolling in the like SQL and advanced data analysis course from Udemy. So going through that, because what I found is that I'd be digging through a lot of GA data, and doing a lot of manual stuff. And I'm like, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? I'm wasting my own time. And so how can we kind of take that, and as we're working through, we basically have this like new user acquisition strategy, which I told you about in the email. I can't really talk about it right now just because it's still kind of low key. But it requires a lot of data analysis. And so I feel like I'm really hindering my own speed and the team speed and everyone's speed by not being well versed enough in like analyzing big data sets. And that's not something that I've ever spent a ton of time doing. Like really, really analyzing huge data sets. So that's kind of my unknown that I'm currently in right now.
That's very interesting. Can you recommend the Udemy SQL course? And if so, then I'll certainly add it to the show notes.
Yeah. It's what's the actual name of it? I think this is just the lesson. It's so right here. This first one is just SQL for data analysis.
Gotcha.
Yep. And so, yeah, it just kind of goes through like running through tables and data cleaning, and talks about like more advanced join functions and all that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I'll certainly add it to the show notes. I'm also right now thinking about how to build a data warehouse where we just combine more data into BigQuery from several sources. And then obviously SQL is a major part of that. But to be honest, I also have hired a marketing analyst that helps me with that and takes a lot of care of the data science side of things. But that's certainly such a universal skill, SQL, because first of all, it's very applicable in many in lots of different contexts, but it's also something that helps you think in a different way. So I find that very interesting. And then in the same realms, you also wrote an article, which again I'll link to in the show notes, called "Growth Experiments and My Idiotic Mistakes." Can you fill us in a little bit about what the most idiotic mistake is that you made so far?
Yeah, I feel like I need to pull up that article. That was a while ago. Let's see. Wow, I do not really leverage my blog as I should. All right, so I wrote that a year ago. And I was saying confusing a hypothesis with a prediction. So the most common that I would see is that's like really related to um, running a test, like running an actual test, and not as many teams like will actually be doing that. We have dedicated teams that are set up to be optimizing, whereas we have other teams that are set up to be driving more and more and more traffic. So that doesn't always mean that we're going to constantly be running tests at that type of magnitude. So the kind of the second two that are the most common is confusing vanity metrics with success metrics, and then falling into the trap of success leader. So I would say confusing vanity metrics with success metrics is like happens all the time. It's just obnoxious hearing it, where it's like, oh sweet, and this is like with many many different companies that I've talked to, and they're like, yeah, like we found that we increased this number, like traffic by a certain percentage. I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Like what was the result of that? And they're like, well, I don't know, but like our traffic's way up. I'm like, okay, cool. And this is like a really hot debate, even internally with a bunch of other people at HubSpot. Like we've talked about this so much. Like when you're building a content strategy, do you start in the middle? My philosophy, I'm very opinionated on this. You start in the highest possible level of intent. So when someone's looking up like best blank software, basically, and you start there, and then you work your way out from the user journey based on the lower levels of intent. But you don't work your way out until you really start, like you have all the content that you possibly could create from the highest intent, and then you go out. And then as you go out, there's an inverse correlation between volume and intent, typically is what happens. And so then you can use the higher volume, and then you can use more like link baity type pieces of content to link to the high intent stuff to raise the high intent in search engines. So but the focus isn't on traffic. This would be like for a freemium product, basically. The focus is on getting more people engaged in using the product. That's the point. Like creating, like writing content, doing videos, whatever, is good if your goal is branding. It's not good if your goal is getting free users, because writing about whatever, motivational quotes, ton of search volume, does that have anything to do with the product you're selling? No. So should there be any celebration around an increase in traffic to that? No, there shouldn't. But then there's the opposite, opinion, which is like, well, traffic is traffic, and you get exposure to your brand, and by having that traffic, that will only, lead into, you can use that leverage to link into other articles, and there's a counter argument to it too. But I'm pretty wrong on the start with a high intent, and all of that vanity metrics and picking metrics that actually matter.
For sure. And then how do you find the metric that actually matters for your business? What's the best way to think about that?
Yeah, so we talked about Brian already. His course on Reforge, which I think you're a part of,
Yeah.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah. His stuff on Reforge is great, basically on building a model, because you can see like what are the actual inputs that affect the output. So if you tweak your traffic by this much, what will the output be? If you tweak your conversions by this much, what will the output? It's a very high level example, but actually modeling out the different scenarios. And we do this now a lot with like, we have an affiliate program. We have this new channel that we're building. We have like virality as a channel, and we can start modeling out in between these channels. If we focus on this one metric, what's going to be the result?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Reforge is probably one of the best courses that I ever took. And I don't even get an affiliate commission for that or anything else. It's just honestly, it's a fantastic product. So good that I paid it completely out of pocket and don't regret a single cent. And it is,
Yeah, same here.
yeah, it's amazing. Period. In the same realms of building different parts of the funnel, or being present in certain pieces of the user journey, you also wrote a guest article on Buffer titled "7 Powerful Social Media Experiments That Grow Traffic by 241% in 8 months." So without we don't have to go too deep into the article, but I'm just curious, have you learned anything new about any sort of experiments, or better said, have any experiments that you have run in the past or since then provided any surprises for you, or any surprising results?
Yeah, definitely in the past. So personally, I've just like really worked my way around HubSpot, trying a bunch of different stuff. So like started off with blogging, then went more into like sales copywriting and automation, then went more a part of that into like working with a bunch of like super good, awesome people at HubSpot to build the first like PQL machine, so the product qualified lead machine, in like 2015, 2016, something like that. And as a part of that, was running a lot of tests. And then after that, we released a new customer service product. So I was like working on marketing and user acquisition for that, and now working on user acquisition for all products. So now we're not working on as a higher volume of tests as we would be if we were in a proper like growth monetization role, which I'm not in anymore. There's an entire team at HubSpot that's dedicated to doing that and running a ton of tests. But I can walk through like an old experiment and a newer one. So the older one is on HubSpot. We have a ton of knowledge-based articles, and it's like I'm trying to figure out how do I use blank feature, forms, meetings, landing pages, like whatever. And we had a bunch of freemium tools at the time. I mean, I do. And so what we're thinking is, okay, as someone's trying to, they're getting deeper and deeper into the product usage of the free tools. Well, inside of the knowledge base, we can start adding like PQLs and upgrade points of like, great. So you're trying to figure out, how do I create a folder to put multiple templates into that, and then link that to a sequence, or what person was trying to figure out. And sorry, a sequence is free and HubSpot, where it's like a series of automated follow-up emails. Someone's trying, they're getting deeper into the product. If we surface any type of upgrade point there, we'll at least get some type of lift. It might not be huge, it might be small, or it might be big, it might be small. So we're going to add some to articles that get a large amount of volume. And the result was nothing. Like, it was a total failure. And I was so gung-ho about it. I'm like, this is going to be sick. Like, we haven't touched it. It's just untapped real estate. Like, we're going to get so much out of it. It totally bombed. Didn't work out whatsoever. And so a recent example, which isn't a test, but something we're doing with like the newer acquisition channel, is trying to figure out, we're targeting certain keywords, and we basically are guessing what's going to be the conversion rate if we rank in for this keyword that we're actually targeting. And we have just we're so wrong, like on so many different ones where we're like, okay, well, this is no intent. Like, we're not going to drive signups to it. And so we would start like basically guessing. That's another thing too. We found it a lot more fun to be like, okay, what do we think is going to happen? And then it forces us to like guess, see what happens, use that as like a new way. And you basically improve your guessing essentially over time, which helps prioritize what should we actually do. And it was bad. Like our guesses have been like so wrong over time, and it's always good. Like we usually underestimate what the impact's going to be, and the impact's way higher. We're like, holy shit, I did not think that would end up happening. I did not think that this specific keyword would that type of volume of new users.
Oh yeah, I love that. I'm a huge fan of testing assumptions, and just basically it's almost like betting, you you're like, hey, I bet this will do X, and then you place your bets before the roulette wheel is being spun, and then you get better at placing bets in general. I love that framework.
Yeah.
There's so much surprising stuff that can come out of that. So, I mean, user acquisition is a huge field. What are you personally curious about at the moment that relates to your job? Like, what is fascinating you right now?
Like relative to all of the stuff we're working on right now. I sorry for saying this again. This new user acquisition channel that we're trying to build is like really fascinating. Another thing we're doing right now is trying to figure out basically mass automation across all of our partners, and not email automation, not sending partner emails, internal automation. So tasks that we would be doing ourselves manually over and over, we're basically using like HubSpot software to like route and automatically add things to someone else's like prospecting pipeline. And as soon as something hits a certain level in the relationship, that auto pings the next person who's like, hey, FYI, this happened, and that pulls in data. And so it's like this automation of internal notifications based on different like leverage points we can have with partners. That's super interesting right now. And another thing that we started working on a while ago, but we haven't really figured out yet, to be honest, and I don't even know if it's going to work, is some variant of like a refer a friend type situation. We have different programs. We have an affiliate program. We have other basically partner programs, but could we get some type of refer a friend to work? We have no idea. So that's something we've floated around. And then another couple of things with like virality that have been on the back burner for too long. Basically, like right now, if you use a product that's paid for, there's no powered by branding, which I think is great. One thing we've thought of is like, well, what if there was as an option, and if you show it, you get X incentive? What would happen then? Because the real power users are the ones paying for it, and some power users are like, absolutely not, I will never show branding. Others are like, I don't care if I get a free subscription or if I get a whatever. You know, we don't know what that incentive would actually be, but playing around a little bit more with product virality is super interesting as well. So that's like 4 different things. Like there's always new stuff that's popping up.
Totally. I think that's part of what makes your job so exciting, is you have that whole bandwidth of things that you can pick from. And it's probably, in a lot of senses, a stage for problems that nobody sees that you're tackling, to kind of come back to the beginning of that conversation. It sounds to me like you're in a really good spot to just do that for the company. And, you know, I mean, Jesus, and you have so many things that you could follow. And experimentation is certainly, and that kind of mindset that comes with it is certainly the right approach for that. So one last question that I'm really curious about is, you mentioned in the beginning that you wanted to become a musician and then figure out that it might not be your biggest skill in that way. So I'd love to just learn, like, what type of musician did you want to be, and then also how did you accept the reality that you might not be the best fit for that? Because I assume it is a similar mindset that you need for accepting that certain experiments failed, or that maybe certain problems that you thought were really important to solve are actually not that important.
Yeah. I mean, with that specific example, I always go back and forth, because I'm like, okay, do I really suck, or have I just not put in enough effort and gotten the right like coaching or training or whatever? Yeah, it's the same question of, if you have a startup, and at what point, and it's like kind of stalemating or flatlining, at what point in time are you like, okay, this is kind of just done, I'm going to hang up the towel and move on? Or it's like, no, you got to persist, and you got to keep going, and you got to keep trying this thing, and it'll work out. You know, there just becomes a point of, there's a fine line between optimism and just being delusional.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Like, it depends on the situation of how you're going to walk the line. I guess, like with the the music example, I don't know. I just feel like I've always put in like a pretty fair amount of effort and just haven't seen as much upside. But a lot of it can depend on like your coach or your training or whatever. And if you don't have the right person who's like helping you along the way, sometimes you need it. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes you do. And with a test or an experiment or something like that, running a test is like a little bit more straightforward. Where you get tripped up, and that actually is something that I've seen happen, is the point from like Tal Raviv, where he talks that article about confusing a hypothesis with a prediction, and that is a huge part on like when should you quit versus when should you keep trying, is when people confuse the two. Because what happens is, let's say we want to run a test, or we want to try reducing the number of, I don't know, fields on a form, something like that. And someone's like, well, we already tried that before. Well, you tried one version of it before. So it's very, of course, dependent, but I think that is a huge takeaway, is like there's always you can always look at the problem in a different lens and try a different solution.
Yeah, I think that's great advice also for people who ask, how can I grow my career in a fast way, is maybe look at problems that somebody already attempted to solve and see if there's another angle to them, or see if there's more context to them, and try to tackle them in a different way. I mean, just as you said, there's so much to experimentation. And in fact, there is this trend of replicating big studies. So I think if I'm correct, oh my God, I might be wrong here, but I think this super famous marshmallow test, where they test if kids eat the marshmallow or not. I'm sure everybody heard about this. I think they replicated that and came to slightly different results, but I might be completely butchering that. Anyway, I think that could be helpful advice to anybody asking themselves how to grow their career in a fast way. And I also feel like you made a little Johnny Cash reference when you said walk the line. So that was super meta with your musician kind of background. I think that's super helpful for everybody, and including myself. Cool. Thank you for all that. I know I want to be super respectful of your time, and I feel like I got a ton of value out of that conversation. And so for anybody listening, where can people learn and hear more about you?
Yeah, I highly recommend not going to my personal website unless you just want to send me a message, because you can do that there pretty easily. I don't touch it. You can. I also have podcasts with someone else I work with at Hubspot, Kieran Flanagan, and that's called Growth TLDR. And Kevin has been a guest, one of our earliest guests that we actually had on the show. That's probably my most active project that I'm working on right now, is that podcast with Kieran. And then I guess just like Twitter, SJ Tousley. That's probably my second most active thing that I do, but other than that, I don't really use LinkedIn that much.
Awesome. I'll not link to the show notes to your personal site. People can.
You can. Yeah, you can go for it. Maybe it'll help me with SEO value, even though it doesn't really matter.
Okay, then I will link to it. And Growth TLDR is certainly an amazing podcast with super insightful stuff on it. Scott, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for that insightful conversation. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the next time.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Have a nice day.